Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Michael Rheese with me. He is a strength coach for the San Francisco Giants organization. He's down in Arizona getting ready to take his teams through spring training. We're going to find out all about that. In the meantime, if you're looking for a Master's of Science degree in applied sports biomechanics and movement science, or maybe applied sport and exercise psychology, maybe it's performance coaching or sports injury and return to performance management, check out Setanta College online, setantacollege.com. You can get 10% off the tuition if you enter the code RS10, that's RS10, and enjoy the show. Well, here we are for another week, and spring training is underway. We've had some folks from the Phillies and from the A's and so on. Now we're back around the Bay Area, at least the San Francisco Giants organization, really down in Arizona, getting spring training underway. I've got Michael Rheese in the house, and he is the strength and conditioning coach for the minor league organization for the Giants. Michael, welcome on to Zealous, man.
Thank you, Rocky. Pleasure to be here, mate. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, now, of course, with that accent, we just got to kick it off. Like, how did the man down under come and end up working for the Giants organization? I mean, I know you did a lot of sports and strength conditioning in Australia, and you came out here a little bit, but what's that whole journey all about?
Yeah, mate, it's been a little bit wild, but essentially, like you said, I did quite a bit of work back in Australia, interning, paid work, full-time work, and I was struggling to get into the professional sporting scene in Australia. I was just a little bit stuck between not having enough experience already at the professional level, and then, having a lot of experience at semi-professional, amateur, and that sort of stuff. And when I spoke to one of my mentors, he sort of alluded to going overseas or trying to find a way in somewhere else into elite sport. And I thought, I've always wanted to go to the States to work. I know the collegiate system is considered elite in Australia. So that was something that I sort of got the wheels in motion with, and applied to or emailed a lot of Division I universities and colleges. Would have heard back from maybe half of them, and then I lost, half again after going through visa talks. But eventually managed to make it happen and landed at UCLA. So I got there, and when I was there, it was very different to anything I've worked in to that point. It was a lot more, I suppose, autocratic. It was incredibly well run in terms of just time frames and that sort of thing. And also I had sort of 13 or 14 teams. I was in Olympic sports, and just having, a team every hour, having hundreds of athletes come through a day, it was a genuine experience. It was really good.
And what were some of the sports that you rotated around at UCLA?
So I was swim and dive. I had men's water polo, women's water polo, beach volleyball, indoor volleyball for women. Had track and field, men's soccer, men's golf.
Wow.
Sort of just bounced around everywhere. I mean, I had a bit of, I don't know if you call it an advantage, but I was lucky that I'd managed to save up some money when I was in Australia, because I knew I was going to try and do this. So when I came over, I didn't have anything else to do except work at UCLA. So you'd get in there at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I would just say to them, like, I'm happy to stay here all day until you guys get sick of me, or until there's no one else to really coach. So I was very lucky in that regard that I could stay there all day and just coach. And even if I wasn't coaching, even if it wasn't my teams, you could still float around and just have a look at how things worked. And
wow, yeah, because normally, I speak to some of our colleagues that have gone through the college route, and 3, 4, maybe 5 sports that they would handle for strength conditioning in some college or university. But man, you just kept the Rolodex flipping through. I'm sure we probably even didn't get to all of the sports you trained for, but wow, what a great experience that was.
Yeah, mate, it was incredible. I should clarify as well, I was interning, so I didn't have to do too much actual programming for teams. I ended up getting handed a couple of teams, but I didn't have to do too much of the admin work, you know, behind closed doors or anything like that. So I could be there on the floor all the time coaching, which was incredibly beneficial for my development. And it was kind of perfect for me because back home in Australia, I'd already done programming for years with the athletes that I'd worked with, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time coaching athletes of the caliber of, collegiate level. So for me, it was a really good fit, and it worked out really, really well.
And so what were the main differences between the athletes in Australia you had been coaching and dealing with program design for the NCAA Division I athletes that you were working with at UCLA?
Definitely the amount of lifting they did, just the amount of training, the sheer volume of training that the athletes at UCLA did was something that I hadn't seen before. They'd lift 3-4 times a week. They'd be into extra mobility. They would then do conditioning sessions on top of that. It was a constant battle, of course, for the athletic trainers and the PTs, because everything you're doing with the athletes in the weight room and out on the field and stuff like that, they're trying to rein them back in and get them ready to go the next day, or make sure they actually stay healthy and stay together. So I just hadn't seen athletes work that hard before, to be honest, and I hadn't seen them be pushed that hard day in, day out before. So it was a cool experience for sure.
And I'm curious, you mentioned how hard it was to try to land a position in Australia. Why is that? Because honestly, that's the first time I've heard somebody mention that. Is it that there aren't that many positions available, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I think there is definitely less positions available in Australia than over here in the States, and possibly in other countries as well, but I don't really know too much about other countries. I found as well in Australia, because my pathway into professional sport wasn't through interning in professional sport right out of university or anything like that. So I didn't really have those contacts either. I was doing a lot of, when I finally did get into professional sport, it was through a lot of just cold emailing, trying to utilize my network as best I could. But it honestly took a few years to be able to get to that point. And I had to, create a portfolio along the way. So when I finally did get the chance to sit down in front of a professional club, I had evidence of the work that I'd done and sort of my growth to that point, and how I'd operated with different teams that I'd run to that point. But a key area that I was finding I was running into trouble was I'd done a lot of interning work, even full-time work, but it was sort of at the semi-professional level. And in order to get a position at the professional level, if it wasn't an intern position, then a lot of the prerequisites or the requirements was, 3 years in professional sport already. So it was, and I still talk to a lot of university students now, and people reach out, and to be honest, they've got the same issue, because they're like, I can't get I can't get the experience if no one's going to get me in there. I can't really do it.
And you can't get in there without the experience. So it's this massive catch-22.
It is, yeah. So it's a little bit tough. And I look back on it now, and I think, righto, like the way I probably could have got in quicker is if I'd tried harder to intern at a professional club while I was in university or straight out of university. But some of the advice that I got early on, and I don't regret the path that I've had at all. It's been really cool, and I've learned a lot. But some of the advice I got early on was that people in professional sport like to see that you've run your own programs and things like that. So I made that a bit more of a priority to try and, find some local clubs and that sort of thing, so I could make mistakes and run my own programs and learn all about it. But at the time, I didn't realize I was sacrificing networking opportunities at the professional level, which was ultimately my goal. So it just took a little bit longer than maybe that path, I think.
So this was, you're talking about the time between UCLA and the Giants, or when was this you're speaking of?
Oh, sorry. No, this is my time from midway through my university degree until getting into professional sport in Australia.
I see. I see. But there was that. There's a window there when I look at kind of your resume, your timeline, where you stayed at UCLA for a while, and then maybe a 2 or 3 year gap in what I saw by the time you started with the San Francisco Giants organization. So, how did that come about? Like you worked at UCLA interning. Did that turn into a some type of paying gig or a graduate program there, or you just ran it through its course and went somewhere else?
Yeah, mate, it's a good question. I didn't quite know what to put on my LinkedIn in that gap because I finished at UCLA, and while I was there, I thought, the way that I've gotten the majority of my roles to date, to be honest, all of them is through networking. And I was been working at UCLA for a couple of months, and I thought, this is actually really cool. Like, this country's awesome for one, but I thought, the strength and conditioning field over here is really, really good fun. And I thought I could definitely see myself trying to stay here, get a proper visa, and work here for a bit. And I thought, right, I need to start trying to build a network. I need to start meeting some people. So I bought a car and started traveling around the state of California and going to different sort of colleges and universities and meeting people. And it just so happened that as I was finishing up at UCLA, professional baseball happens to be looking for people at that time of year. That's just when they do all their recruiting, November, December, that sort of thing. So I applied for a few gigs. I reached out to my network that I'd formed within California, and someone happened to say, "Look, I know the guys at the Giants. If you give me a resume, I'll make sure it goes through the right channels." So the Giants got onto me and went through the interview process, did everything there, and it got to about January, and they said, "Look, we've looked into the visa, and it might take a couple of months. We're not sure if we're willing to risk it. We can't have you not be ready for spring training." I said, "Beauty, no worries." I was obviously incredibly disappointed, but said no worries. And they were honestly really good to me. They said, "Look, we like the way you interviewed. Off the record, we know a couple other clubs that are in a similar position to us. If you apply for these roles and let us know, then we'll put in a good word for you." And honestly, I took it with a grain of salt. I didn't really know these people, and I'd only spoken to them a little bit on the phone. But I applied for the roles. They said, "Yep, beauty, we'll put in a good word." And I was on the phone to another club within a couple of days. They actually offered me a role, but then it took too long to get a visa. So unfortunately, they had to renege on the offer, and I had to go back to Australia. And when I was in Australia, so that was in 2022 that I headed back there, and this is where the gap is on my LinkedIn. When I was back there, I did like a bit of consulting work. I helped a friend of mine who owns a couple of gyms actually open up another one and helped him run his clinic for a few months. I even went back to my hometown and did a bit of work there as well. I kind of just honestly cruised through that year, did a lot of professional development stuff, courses, that sort of thing, finished off my master's. And because I've been in constant contact with a couple of baseball clubs the whole time. So they were sort of saying, "Yep, we'll give you a bell in November. We'll see if we can get something going." So I thought, all right, I'll just try and work on myself, develop, and get a bit of money coming in this year, and then we'll see what happens.
I love it. I love it. Everything from your internships and from your networking for cruising up and down the California strip, so to speak, and just making it happen and reaching your hand out and just creating that network. It is a common theme for those that succeed in this industry. And even when you go back to Australia, it's not like you sat back on and rested on your laurels. You were very actively engaged and continuing to pursue the direction of your dreams. Fantastic. And so, okay, I imagine you have a visa now, and the Giants called you up and said, "Hey, you know what? We've got a spot for you. Come on back." Is that what happened?
It is. Yeah, they ended up calling me in November. And they said, "How are you doing? Are you stateside?" I said, No, I'm still in Australia. But I've sorted the visa out. I said, I've got that under control. So if you want me to interview or anything like that again, then we don't have to worry about that this time around. And they said, yeah, fantastic. We've got a position open. We'd love to interview you. So went through the interviews, and yeah, it all went really well, and they offered me a spot. Turns out the hardest part was actually the background check. The background check for the visa was super simple, but the one that I actually had to go through just as a bit of a club policy or whatever took about 6 weeks. So I ended up coming in on the back end of spring training. There was 2 weeks to go, so it was all a bit of a blur once I got in. But once I was here for a couple of months and started to understand how everything worked, and met a few people and got a few names sorted, it's been smooth sailing and an awesome experience from there. I'm absolutely loving it. We've got a good crew here.
And now we're a couple of weeks into spring training, more or less, maybe 1 to 2 weeks. By the time this airs, it'll be more like a month or so. But what's your role down there in Arizona?
Yeah, so last year I was one of the strength coaches here in the Arizona Complex League. We had 2 teams, so it was myself, another strength coach, Joe Palazzolo, who's been here for 10 years roughly, I think. So my role was to run the strength and conditioning program for my team, and just to work, hand in hand with Joe, and essentially learn from someone who'd been in baseball for a long time. I couldn't be more thankful for how it was all structured, because he's been an excellent resource, and it's just been phenomenal for my development. So at the moment, we've got, as you know, guys from here, there, and everywhere. We've got some guys from the ACL all the way up to the major leagues who are down here. So it's been really cool just to hang out with everyone. It's good. You've got sort of 10 S&C coaches floating around at any one time. You've got all the physical therapists, all the ATs. So there's a lot of people to work with, a lot of people to learn from.
And do you divvy up the players that come into the complex between you and the other strength coach and maybe the other 8 that are floating around here? How does it work? Or do you take, is it positional where, I've got pitchers and catchers, you've got the infielders, you've got the outfielders. How does it work?
Yeah, great question. So for any of the programming, our coordinator will divvy it up. So you'll have some pitchers, position players of every position, and you'll do all the programming for them within, the organization's philosophy and framework. But there's a lot of room for you to add, subtract, vary anything that any one player requires, just to make sure it's as individualized to them as possible. But on any given day, just in terms of the flow of the day, you might have position players for their stretch, then you might have pitchers for their conditioning, and then come the weight room, it's usually all hands on deck. But you might have a select group of players that you're sort of watching out for, just depending on whether they're, acute rehab, or whether they're honestly some guys that just need a bit more of a hand in the weight room than some more veteran guys. So there's a good mix every single day. You're never doing just the same group of guys. You're always bouncing around a little bit, which is good.
And how much creative license and freedom do you have with the program design for the athletes that come see you? Because I know you've got in your background cricket as part of your as part of your experience, and so I definitely want to ask some questions about how they correlate between baseball and cricket. But first, how much freedom and creative license do you have in the programs you design?
Definitely more than I thought I would when I was first
really
getting into professional sport. Yeah. I was really excited when I got here, and the framework was presented to me, the philosophies were presented to me, and then once we got into the programming, how much freedom you actually had to essentially get, the optimal amount of training for a guy. Essentially get the perfectly tapered program to them. Of course, you can't just go and make changes and shoot from the hip. You have to be able to justify everything to the team and let everyone know why you're doing that and why this person may be doing this and that. And I think that's one of the best things as well. That creates discussion, that creates opportunities for everyone to learn. and potentially to figure out better ways of doing things, different ways of doing things. But the creative license is definitely there for sure.
Can you provide me with an anecdotal kind of example of when that occurred, when you decided to implement some movements or concepts into somebody's program and then provided the reasoning behind it? Something that's not necessarily traditional or common.
Ooh, non-traditional or common. I don't know if I was pulling anything that fancy out of the bag of tricks, but but no, I mean, if our framework, for example, is okay, we're going to lift 3 times a week, and in these lifts, one lift has to be heavy, or let's say, for example, 2 lifts have to be really heavy and one's going to be really poppy. These are going to be the key movements that we're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. And I look at that lift, or I look at that program, and I look at the data that we've got on a certain guy, and I say, righto, to be honest, this guy can already produce a lot of force. You know, this guy already rotates incredibly well, but he's not that explosive. You know, like he's just not able to actually convert all the force that he's got into output. He loses it along the way somewhere. So an example could be, I say, you know, why would I train this guy heavy twice a week and give him one poppy day when really what I need to be doing is training him and teaching him how to utilize the force he's got as rapidly as possible and minimize that energy leakage. So then you go in there and you say, righto, what's actually going to transfer best to that? You know, maybe I need to add in some movements that are going to give him or change some like musculoskeletal properties. So, you know, developing tendon stiffness, developing his ability not only to generate force in the sagittal plane, but also in the frontal plane. If we can see from his testing that he's lacking power in the transverse plane, why is that? You know, what's going on through his torso? What's going on through pelvic rotation, through that leg that's going to strike the ground first? And from there, just starting to try and break things down and say, all right, this is where we think we're finding those, like this is where we think the force is dissipating, or this is where we think we're lacking stiffness, or we're lacking the ability to actually transfer through the kinetic chain, and then using exercises to target that. And that could be anything from med ball work, like in a picture, it could be anything from med ball work, loading over that lead leg. If guys can't actually maintain proper balance and actually get enough drive from that back leg, then it's righto. Let's actually challenge that back leg a little bit. Let's go, you know, things like just simple things, single leg squats off blocks. Let's start going with some 3D strap work to actually pull them across into positions they don't want to go into with that back leg, obviously into the ground. Just things like that.
Right on.
You can really,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you can really muck around with it and just see what works with some guys and what doesn't work with others. And when you've got 5 or 6 guys in terms of S&C coaches doing that with, you know, 100 odd players all the time every day, you start to find some pretty cool stuff, and you start to come up with a few things that you definitely know will work in certain situations.
Yeah, I love it. It's not the one size fits all approach, because everyone's going to respond in their own unique way to whatever stimuli it's been fed. You know, so a split squat with the rear leg raised up is going to be executed, well, probably differently on the same athlete, comparing left and right legs against one another, but also from one athlete to the next. So it's great to know that you've got that freedom to dial in what the appropriate movements should be for each athlete, as well as the intensity levels, the load, and so on. So I got to ask about cricket, because here it is, one of the most populous sports on the planet, with the exception of in the United States. I don't think anybody could explain you the basic rules of cricket, anyone that you ran onto on the sidewalk of Phoenix or Scottsdale or wherever. But how do you take those elements, or have you Have you taken the strength conditioning elements of cricket and applied it to baseball? Do they mesh well? Do they overlap quite nicely? Or it doesn't really matter because a human's a human. I'm going to look at what they need, and there's not much I'm taking from that.
Yeah, the last point there is interesting. Well, just the first point first. You're right. Anytime you talk about cricket, a lot of the things I get from the guys here are, mate, you can hit it backwards behind the catcher in that sport. It doesn't make any sense. Don't worry about it. and I'm sort of like, yeah, mate, fair enough. That's a valid point, I suppose. But your latter point about, does it matter? Are you humans are human? I think the more experience I get in this field, the more I'm starting to honestly lean that way. You can have your own framework and you can have these concepts, but it's really just about shifting your framework and applying those concepts to whatever context you're working in. Like a lot of the stuff stays the same. It's just about identifying what these guys actually do on a daily basis and what you need to do to make them durable enough to do those things at a high level. And a lot of it is the same: push, pull, hinge, all that sort of stuff. But there's definitely a few intricacies for sure, like we were speaking about before. And I think there are definitely similarities between cricket and baseball. Just simple things like hip shoulder separation. Slings, your slings from bottom to top. Just like thoracic-scapular rhythm, that sort of stuff. Scapulohumeral rhythm, all that sort of stuff. Is incredibly similar between the two sports. Developing stiffness in the torso, like in the trunk, because not only do you have to be able to accelerate at an incredible rate, but if you can't decelerate and actually stop that momentum, then that's where we run into issues. I tend to say to a lot of the athletes as well, your body is only going to allow you to accelerate at a rate that it thinks you can also decelerate from. So if you're not strong in those deceleration movements and those eccentric loading patterns, then you're not going to be able to actually realize your potential. And that tends to help them out a little bit when they're doing simple things like anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension, because those ones they can feel fairly easy at times and be a bit monotonous, especially if we're working through isometrics with those things. But I find when you start talking to them about that sort of stuff, it tends to click a little bit and resonate a bit, and helps them just lock in for those simple ones a little bit more. But
yeah. Well, I'm just thinking. Sorry, but you're talking mainly about a rotary athlete with baseball. They most of the time they hold on to the bat, but they do let go of the ball. So we got those things to contend with. But like to your point, the scapulothoracic, the relationship of the humerus with the thoracic, and we've got these kinematic sequences. So my question, Michael, is this: is that in the gym setting, in the weight room itself, do you look to see what areas are moving faster than they need to, and what areas aren't moving fast enough? And do you design movements, programs, or just right there in a specific exercise that is going to address those things, where the things that are moving too slowly, I need to encourage more speed through there, and this area is overtaking it and moving way too fast, putting tremendous strain on the soft tissue. We think of Tommy John and rotator cuff as well. Like, how do you play around with the kinematic sequencing in a resistance training setting? That's my question.
Yes. Yeah. Short answer is yes. I myself, I can watch the game, and I'm getting better at this the more exposure I have to it. But I can watch the game and say, you can see a guy and say something looks a little bit funky. But I can't quite pin down what that is a lot of the time at the moment. I can see it and I'm like, you're sort of trying to work it out. But that's where, collaborating with the team around you is incredibly vital. And I lean on that a lot. And when I say the team around me, I'm talking specifically with pitching and hitting coaches now, because they can see it straight away. Like they usually know what's going on, especially with pitches. That's where, because they're in control. They're the ones that people are reacting to. The hitters are a little bit different because there's so many different variables, so many different constraints placed upon them. They're just trying to get into the best spot as quick as possible. So it's a little bit harder to work on specific mechanics with them. What I'm trying to do with them is just give them everything that they need, to give them all the tools to be able to get into those spots. So if the hitting coach says, for whatever reason, this hitter just can't actually separate hip and shoulder, they're just pulling everything around at once, or they can't really get right over into that front leg as they hit, or get rear leg around, then I start to think, hip shoulder separation, we're talking about a bit of motor control, we're potentially talking about some sequencing, that sort of thing, so I can work on that in the weight room.
Right on. And with that, like, if you don't have that separation or disassociation between rib cage and pelvis, are you going to reduce the amount of stiffness training and bracing and work more on, we're going to bring this leg forward to encourage pelvic rotation in this direction, and I want you to drive like a cable press in the opposing direction? So we're really working it under that level, or is it just all mobility and stretching? Like, do you apply those same concepts to the resistance portion of their program, or do you just leave that up to stretching?
No, you've hit the nail on the head, mate. Exactly right. So, in my opinion, if I just work on mobility, and this is just an opinion formed from seeing what a lot of other people do, of course. I didn't sit down one day and just say, yeah, this is genius, this is my idea. But just seeing it from a lot of other people, and what I've taken from them is I can mobilize tissue as much as I like, but if I don't then provide load to that tissue and do it consistently, then the body is not going to adapt to that new range. I might have it acutely for a little bit, but in order to actually get new usable range, then we have to definitely load the tissue in that new range and strengthen the tissue in that new range. So you're exactly right. I'd try and hit it from a few different aspects, and one would be to mobilize it. The other one would be to definitely do loaded movements through that new range. And to be honest, the first movements I'd probably do would be try and get end range isometrics. So open up new range and then get as far into that new range as I can and start to try and develop isometric strength there. So ideally over time, it builds the strength of that tissue right at the end, and I can actually start to use it concentrically.
So in essence, like eccentric loading to the end range and holding into an isometric position is what you're saying.
Correct. Except before I even do eccentrics, I'll probably assist someone, or like they'll assist themselves to get into that end range. If we think about it from a shoulder perspective, for example, if I open up someone's shoulder and give them new range there, then they're usually not going to have any strength in the newfound range. So what you can do is you can get them on a band, a Kaiser, anything like that, or I can just help them, but just get them to actually pull the weight back into that new range and then just hold there and literally just develop end range isometric strength.
Okay, and then totally geeking out with you right now because I'm very intrigued by this. So you go there into that shoulder abduction, external rotation, and we could even maybe call it flexion too. We get them in that position. You give them that isometrics. Now, simultaneously, we should see that if we follow this kind of movement pattern, we should see rib rotation in one direction. So then do you go from the shoulder, and now I'm going to put that rib cage in a position at that end range, and I'm going to work on that. Now, simultaneously to that arm cocking back for the throw, the rib cage rotates that way. I want to put the pelvis in the opposing direction of rotation to its end range, and I'm going to work isometrics there. And do you see what I'm saying? Do you follow almost like a joint by joint or bony structure all the way down the chain and be like, hey, let's find where you're weak in this whole chain? Because there's going to be somewhere. Maybe it's the shoulder, but maybe they've got the strength there. And you're like, okay, well, that isn't it. Let's follow it down. Maybe it's their T-spine. Maybe it's that scap. Maybe that scap can't actually adduct. So can we put it into that end range of adduction or abduction? I'm going off on this, but do you follow that at all?
I do follow what you're saying, and I like it in theory. I think it'd be a little bit tough to set up sometimes, but I like it in theory. I'd probably go joint by joint initially, just to isolate the strength in each joint, and then I would probably use a more dynamic movement once I knew I had newfound range and newfound strength in those positions. Then I would probably start to actually use a loaded skill-based movement to develop that sequencing in that new range.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's how I would approach it. I actually don't mind. I don't mind that idea from you. I might steal that, mate.
Yeah, steal it away. Anything you want.
I might play around with it. I might play around with that and just see what I can do.
Because what I've found is that the unconscious mind is creating strategies of force production and movement all the time, and it has to contend and negotiate with previous injuries and episodes and everything else that the body's experiencing. So where we may find a restriction in separation, maybe that thoracic pelvic relationship, the rib cage and the pelvis, isn't wanting to go through this separation. But maybe that's the strategy that the brain is using to reduce the amount of impact and force generated through some other area of the body. So let's just say they had some torsion on their knee. And so as a way to reduce the knee torsion, we're going to reduce the amount of disassociation and sling effect we can have. So it just starts you on this treasure map, this hunting down of the underlying culprit here. Sometimes X marks the spot, and if we get that disassociation to occur, everything's just as glorious as can be. But other times you get that separation, you're like, that just didn't hit it. So you kind of hunt things down. I get a feeling that you kind of do the same thing. Just because you give them an exercise, you're not creating an expectation that that's just going to be what they need.
Correct, 100%. Yeah, you never. Well, not you never, but I try never to speak in absolutes. This will sort out this. If they say, if someone comes up to you and says, we can't do this, or this athlete's struggling with this, I'll really try to avoid saying, yep, do this, that'll fix it. Because you're right, it's always exploration. So it's always, okay, this is what we need to achieve. We can't do this at the moment. Why is that? And let's start brainstorming ideas of why that is. And then let's start trying to tick off some of these and try to hit some of these spots and see what actually works. It's interesting. I was having a conversation the other day with our strength and conditioning coach for the rehab side. And he was saying a similar thing. He's got a number of pitches in rehab, and he tries different things with each one of them sometimes before they throw, because he knows what they're flagged for. He knows what he's trying to achieve, and our pitching rehab coordinator and whatnot know what they're trying to achieve. So he'll sometimes say, righto, what am I looking for here? Okay, here's some exercises that might help that. And then they'll see what happens in these throwing sessions. They'll just plug and play and see what works, see what doesn't. And a lot of the times, it is just through experimentation and just through trying to actually come up with some solutions. And then the only way to find out is to test them. You're right.
Yeah, assess and reassess, right?
Correct, exactly. And sometimes you're right. You might think it's this area that's affecting it, and you go to work on that area, but for some reason you still can't get what you're looking for. Similar to what you said before, it could be a different area of the body that's actually the subconscious mind is not allowing an athlete to access what they want to access, because it knows if it goes into that position or goes essentially goes into that position, then it could be compromised.
Yeah, I mean, it may be seemingly innocuous as the ability for the big toe joint to dorsiflex properly, and if I have a player or person who is restricted in that big toe joint, they are going to have a hard time extending through that same side hip, and therefore they're going to struggle landing and loading on the opposite leg, and that could set up a whole cascade of events just based on that. And next thing you know, their rotator cuff is really taking the toll because the bigger muscles that should be decelerating, like the glute hamstring complex on that forward leg, can't properly load and decelerate because they have a hard time getting off that big toe. So it's those kind of things that are like the puzzle. It's just fun to do a puzzle. Now, I recently had on one of your colleagues down there, Tom Battaglia. He's one of the physical therapists. And how much do you work with the PTs and the athletic trainers on a regular basis when spring training is going on?
Yeah, I mean, Tom's a legend, by the way. Very good fella. New dad. So good on him. Yeah. He still hasn't had me around for a pool party yet, mate, but I won't hold that against you. But we work hand in hand with those guys every single day. Yeah. So Mitch Kirchhoff, who's our strength and rehabilitation coach, he'll work hand in hand with the PTs a lot more than I will. He'll work with them literally every day, meet with them every day, make sure that they know where guys are at, make sure that they've got the most up-to-date plan for guys, because if we're operating on a criterion-based, rehab plan, then things are literally changing every day. Guys are progressing quicker than you thought. Some guys are progressing slower than you thought. So it's a constant collaboration to make sure that we're trying to get guys in the right spot. I'll occasionally work with the PTs just depending on who the player is and whether it's an acute rehabilitation or not. So usually I'll work more with the acute ones than the actual long-term ones. That'll definitely be more of Mitch. And the ATs, yeah, we meet with them every day. Make sure that we're across the board with everyone at the moment in camp, but in season it would just be the team. Make sure you're across the board with everyone in the team. Flag anything that's going on. Yeah, it's I love it. Like, I mean, that's the way that.
And what specifically? What are the things that you love? Like, or the whether it's the cases, the type of athletes that you're working with, or what is it of your position that is the top? Like, this is the stuff I really love.
Oh, mate, it's I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, for me at the moment, it's when guys go up. When guys head off to affiliates, that's the thing that definitely brings you a lot of joy, because they've grinded it out. They've battled away, and then they sort of get their shot, and they get to go and see what they can do. So that's been really enjoyable. I also just like growth in general. Last year I saw so much growth in so many guys in terms of their knowledge of their own body, their knowledge of how to be a professional athlete, how to create routines that work for them, how to actually just take care of their own stuff. They don't need someone saying, what do you got now? What are you doing today? What's this? What's that? They just know. They'll come and tell you. They'll start coming telling you, being like, yep, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, and then I'm going to do this. And you're sort of like, beautiful, mate. We'll see you when we're looking at you. But yeah, that sort of stuff's been really enjoyable to watch. Seeing them win a game or two here and there is always fun as well. But yeah, that long-term stuff is really cool.
And then in regards to your own influences professionally, right? Where do you get your information, or who or what have been the main influencers for your career?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I try to use a few different resources. I do a fair bit of reading and definitely listen to some podcasts here and there. I also I used lecturers in university early on, to be honest,
Really?
which was a bit of an eye opener. Yeah, one day I don't know what I was doing, but I was staying late in class for some reason. I wasn't in trouble, but I don't know what I was doing. And I just started talking to my lecturer, and I said, I don't know what I want to do. You know, I'm 2 years into this degree, and I still don't know what I want to do. And he was like, well, you should probably get out there and start doing something, and then you'll figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And I sort of went, what do you mean? How am I meant to do that? And he said, righto, get an A4 bit of paper, and you and I will write down who you know right now. And I sort of said to him, I said, mate, I don't know anyone. he said, well, you know me, and I know a few people. So we started drawing that out, and then, you start going, well, I know this person. And in a couple of months, I had 5 different placements or internships, and was sort of bouncing all around the surf coast there, working at different places. So that was, I mean, and then from there, I obviously continued to utilize that method. So,
Love it.
met a few people along the way and stayed in contact with them and would bounce a lot of questions off them. And that's been something that's been incredibly helpful for me. I also think just a couple of guys, when I was sort of going through university in Australia, they were fairly prominent on social media, and I used to have a look at a lot of the stuff that they did and just try and utilize some of their ideas and develop some of my own frameworks and concepts based off that. So I suppose it's been a bit of a mixture, to be honest. There's no one sort of thing. But I did always like going to conferences and workshops and stuff like that. I think they're a really good place to just be able to do things practically.
Certainly. Yeah, and so let's say you've been with the Giants organization for a few seasons. Are there other sports that you would want to pursue, more or less doing the same thing? Does hockey or basketball or football, whether American or Australian rules, are there directions that you're intrigued by?
Yeah, mate, I want to do it all. Honestly, yeah, I would love to work in every sport and just see what it's like, and just experience all those different opportunities. But if I had to choose and pick a couple, I think I really enjoy the idea of working in snow sports or surfing. Just something a little bit different, something that isn't, or I'd say wouldn't really conform to traditional strength and conditioning methodologies. I've spoken to quite a few people not quite a few, I've spoken to a few people in those sports, and they do all sorts of different stuff in order to just get stimulus into their athletes, in order to make sure their athletes enjoy actually doing strength and conditioning work. So I think that would be really cool. There'll always be a spot for Aussie rules football. Definitely.
In your heart, always a spot in your heart for that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure, mate. If I got offered the chance to work professionally in Australian rules football again, I'd definitely have a crack at it. Maybe after a few seasons in baseball, for sure.
Rugby,
yeah. I worked at a private school down on the surf coast in Geelong for a year or so, and rugby was one of the sports I worked with there, and those athletes were awesome. That was I was working with guys that were sort of 16 to 18 years old, and they were epic. They just loved the weight room, super hard workers. They're tough as nails. They're rugby players, and they were actually pretty funny. The school required them to play sports in both summer and winter. So rugby was your winter sport, and they all wanted to get huge, of course. So in the winter, they signed up for table tennis and would play table tennis. So they'd lift weights every day of the week, or every second day, and then they'd go to table tennis practice and burn 10 calories. they thought it was elite. So, and so did I, to be honest. They were all growing, so it was good.
That's great. All right. So if people want to just follow your pursuits, do you have some social media sites? Do you do Instagram, or of course we connected on LinkedIn. I'll put that connection in the descriptions, but anywhere else?
I actually need to get a bit of a professional Instagram going. I don't have one yet, but I'm definitely keen to get one going just to try and once again expand the network and share some ideas and see if I can learn some things from other people. So stay tuned for that. But I think LinkedIn's the best one for me at the moment. So just Michael, Michael, Rheese, Rheese. Should be the easiest way to find me there.
And okay, now the last question I'm going to ask you, Michael, is you're in Arizona and the summer is coming. And are you there because it reminds you of the outback and it's just a nice connection with the hottest place on the planet, or what? Are you enjoying the heat?
Mate, I don't mind the heat. I've got to be honest, I didn't expect it to be as hot as it was last year. I honestly couldn't believe the boys were playing in it. I was in the dugout some days just, about to say something and then had to bite my tongue because I thought, hold on, these guys are out there for 9 innings and I'm sitting in the dugout with a couple of fans above me. I better just keep quiet here. But yeah, it was seriously hot down here. But I suppose it just makes it a bit more of a slog, makes everyone feel like they're in it together. And, mate, you can play a little bit of afternoon golf and the weather's still perfect, so no complaints about that.
There you go. All right, no complaints. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and your wisdom, and I look forward to watching your career progress as well as the Giants season progress too. So thanks for coming on, Michael. I really like it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rocky. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I'm looking forward to catching up down the line.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you to the San Francisco Giants organization, of course, Michael Rheese, for coming on and sharing all he did. And remember, if you're looking for a little education in the form of a master's degree, we've got applied sports biomechanics and movement science, applied sport and exercise psychology, performance coaching, and sports injuries and return to performance management at Satan's College. Go to Satan's College online, check it out. Until next week, go make it a good one.